Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. This is Denise King Francisco, aka Dana, and I am joined by David Sturkin and the lovely Nicole Fix. Hey, you two.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Tonight we're talking about the wisdom of our ancestral elders. I think it's such a great topic, especially right now in the new year. And we always kind of bandy about a subject, just usually a day or two before we come on live with everybody. And Cad had a couple of great ideas with regard to tonight's show. And Cad, would you speak to why you wanted to talk about, what it is that our ancestors have to share? And life wasn't always easy for them, and in that we can find wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that I have been really taken with probably over the last couple of months is really developing an attitude of gratitude. As I've been preparing for Imbolc, one of the things, which is the 1st of February on the pagan calendar, one of the things is I've been doing some reading is it just talked about what it was like in those ancient times. And ancient to me isn't hundreds of years ago. It's even just really not that long ago. To really think about what our ancestors went through in order for us to be where we are. And here's just an example for me. The other day, actually it was yesterday, I got up and I had no heat. Okay, so for me, that's a simple phone call to the management company to let them know the boiler's not working. But to our ancestors, to not have wood, and to maybe not have the means to make a fire, something as simple as having dry clothes during the winter months when the snow or the rain is pelting you, and how do you keep things dry? How do they keep their food cold, or and if it was cold, how did they prevent it from rotting and molding? And I think it's really created kind of an attitude for me to really think about, what I oftentimes take for granted every day. Like just before the show, I was washing dishes, and as I turned the water on, I thought, what was it like for my ancestors to have to heat water, to maybe go down to the creek to actually get water and bring it up. And so, it's created a new appreciation, I think, for me. Also an awareness that when I'm going through my day, that I'm thinking about, wow, what was this like for the ancestors that lived before me? Oftentimes the stuff I just take for granted, run to the grocery store, grab something off the shelf. They couldn't do that. So it's created a different mindset in me, I think, that is helping me to be more appreciative.
I like that. I was thinking about what you offered with that, and I thought, what about those stories about I walked 5 miles in 5 feet of snow to get to school, and I thought, what? I was raised by 2 Yoopers, so that might have actually been for real.
Yeah.
Back in the day. Nicole, how do you feel about that? Reflecting back on the things that our ancestors had to go through. Oftentimes we refer to those as the good old days.
Yeah, I just think of stories I heard about, like from my grandma growing up, about not having indoor plumbing and, having an outhouse and things that, like, I would never even consider to be a luxury, right?
Yeah.
So these things that I take for granted, that I think most of us take for granted, that would have been considered a major luxury 100 years ago. And it does make you really kind of stop and think about how blessed we are, and just our current time. So.
I know. And it makes me think about, how often we say, I wish I would have listened more closely. I wish I would have listened to the stories. And we can remember about some of the hardships and things like that maybe they shared around the table, or maybe our parents shared about their parents. But a lot of times, oftentimes, we do hear people say, gee, I was just a kid, but I wish I would have listened to what they had to say. Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's interesting. Even with my father's 93 years old. And one of the things that I'm finding is he'll start to tell a story that I've never heard before. And, I think one of my younger brother and I were talking about that he rambles a lot, but in those in between his ramblings, he starts to share some stories that I've never heard, and this was a time when families would gather together and then around the fire at night, because you had a candle, you had a lantern for light. The outside, it got dark very early, so this was a time the stories were told. The stories of the grandparents, the grandmas, the about the deities and how they came to be. And so, this is kind of we don't do that a whole lot anymore. In fact, I can't remember. I don't remember a time where we really ever did, in my family at least. There's certainly the holiday gatherings, but so I think about those times when people gathered and told the stories, and how wonderful that would be to bring those traditions back.
And this is a question for both of you. If you could go back in time, if you could reach across time, what are some of the questions that you would ask your ancestors about? Would it be about spirituality? Would it be about recipes and cooking? Would it be about music and traditions? What would you ask about if you could ask ancestors from any moment in time in your family history? Nicole?
That's what comes to my mind. I mean, I love all of the questions you presented, but thinking, and that kind of incorporates this question. My question kind of incorporates those, but what brought you joy? There was such hardship, and we know that joy is kind of the balancer of hardship. So what did you do to find joy? Was it there? Was it through cooking? Was it through community? Was it through dance or music, laughter in some sort, right? But how did you make that happen?
That's a great question, Nicole. Right. Because after you woke up before the crack of dawn and worked your bones, worked yourself to the, bone all day long, then you rustled up some victuals, and then you sat around. What did you do for joy? Was it to bring out the fiddle? Was it to tell the stories? What was it that brought joy? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cad, what would you want to ask your ancestors?
One of the things that I really think about a lot is how did they stay? Well, it's obvious how they stayed so connected to the land. But how did they develop a relationship with the land? Is what I would. The land and nature itself, because obviously that had to be part of their reality because they wouldn't have been able to survive. So how did they work to develop that relationship? And that's something, because I feel like for me, I lived in a city. Trying to keep that part of me alive is an important thing for me. And so that would be a question I would ask them.
That's a great question too, Nicole. I cut you off and I apologize. We were talking about joy and where they may have found the joy.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add that, so many people, I think, right now currently feel so burned out on the world, like the pandemic fatigue, pandemic burnout in life, work. There's so much work, and how to balance it out with like kind of these pleasurable and relaxing things too. But like there might not have been that luxury or choice before, right? So like I guess that just emphasizing that we know that there was pleasurable things too. So I want to know how they made that happen.
Right.
So that we can learn from that, right, as we deal with just all of the modern day stressors.
Mhm. As you were saying that, I was in my mind's eye seeing Little House on the Prairie and Laura Ingalls Wilder, right, and her friends running down the meadow with their metal lunch boxes, giggling and rolling around, and it reminds me of, Willa Cather book. I love the author Willa Cather talking about the prairie. And, one of my favorite things, still to this day, Garrison Keillor has always been one of my very favorite authors and radio personalities. And I remember just up until the last few years, driving home from teaching in Detroit or Traverse City or where have you, and turning on the Prairie Home Companion. I love to listen to the radio, whatever, the radio shows, and even all the corny ad libs and sound effects. And that was something I looked forward to driving home from teaching. And thinking about, the relatives huddled around the radio, or literally, read out of the Bible. But I think I would want to know, going way, way back, what did they call God? Who was God? And what and who represented God to them?
Right.
Way back in time. And to learn about how they interpreted God.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think about how did they, when we were in Ireland, who was it who established and decided that, a certain god was over this or a goddess was over that, or that's always fascinated me. Absolutely. I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Rob is saying, I hated Nellie Olson. And Catherine Harrison is saying, she taught me how to deal with such people, Rob.
That's true. She was like the epitome of a bully, right?
And
just mean, right? Oh, goodness, the old school mean girl.
The other thing I think that was interesting to me as well was is that, for during the winter time for some of our ancestors, and probably many of them, in order to keep their livestock safe, and they often would bring them in the home with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think about, you got maybe you have your parents living with you, you've got your kids, and you've got the cow or the horse or the pig.
So crazy.
All living in this little space, because for them, the livestock were a means for food as well. Where we just go to Meijer and grab it out of the freezer place and things like that. So it just there was in some ways it's interesting because to me in some ways there was a simplicity, but there was a complexity as well.
Mm-hmm.
They had very little.
Mm-hmm.
And Dana, as you were talking about the House on the Prairie show, I mean, I can remember the times where they were sitting around the fire, and one of them would start playing the harmonica or things like that, and yet, as you said, Nicole, there was so much joy all the time because it didn't seem like they were, even though they were burdened down, they find the joy in what was going on around them. So yeah.
And how do you feel about this idea? I'll just ask you the question. Do you feel that our ancestors depended on the wisdom of their ancestors to get through?
Yeah, I feel like elders were so much more revered and honored, right, than they may be now. You know?
There's no question about that.
Yeah, and how the wisdom that comes with the aging process has been kind of dismissed currently, right? Whereas before, those are the people that you ask for advice from, that, you know, have the sage advice, right? So, yeah, I think so.
At the very least, they knew where to rub, you know, the bear grease, right, to make things better. One of the things that I so appreciate about, you know, Del Marie and Barbara is that, you know, it wasn't too long ago, Barbara called me and she said, "Do you have some bear root?" And I said, "I do. I have kind of a little bit of a hoarded stockpile of bear root." And she said, "Would you send some bear root out to us? We need that for the COVID symptoms." And I thought to myself, so how many pharmacists do you suppose are, rather than Mucinex, are saying, well, why don't you call and see if your relatives have some bear root and boil that up or put it on some hot rocks and see how that works for you?
That is profound wisdom.
Yeah. So I sent part of the hoard out there, and they were happy. Hey, Linda Griezak. It's good to see you, honey. She's saying perhaps they found joy by being grateful for what they had.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that they were much more observers of nature. And as you said, Denise, you know, they figured out how to use some of the medicines. And so, yeah, it was a very, I think, just not that we should get rid of our technology or any of that. We don't want to necessarily go back, but I think we can develop a attitude in which we are very respectful of those times and also respectful of how it's brought us to where we are. I mean, that's the gratitude for that. Yeah.
Well, as the three of us are here speaking, both of you and I are one day going to be elder ancestors. So, Nicole, as part of your legacy as an elder ancestor, what would you want Sophia to carry on from you to her ancestors?
That's such a loaded question. There's so much. I think of like this practical piece of like how much I love food and the joy of cooking and just, you know, community and around the table. But then I also think of like kind of wisdom that I would want to give to my younger self of just like, and things I'll say to myself now is like, what if you knew without a shadow of a doubt and could trust that everything is going to work out and is working out right exactly as it should? What would your behavior look like right now? And so I guess I kind of think of that of, you know, especially in these trying times, if we knew without a shadow of a doubt that everything is happening exactly as it's meant to, how might our behavior look different?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right? So, and it's, you know, would we be more prone to be grateful? Would we be more prone to have joy, right? If we could trust that everything is working out.
That's a great one. Thank you for that. I like that a lot. Cad, what about you? What do you want your legacy to be to your nieces and your nephews? What do you want Easton to remember that his Uncle Cad taught him?
Well, so I think one of the things that I would like to be able to leave behind is just the importance of caring for people.
Mm-hmm.
Expressing compassion towards them. It's interesting. I already have a nephew who, so I became a nurse because I had an aunt who was a nurse, and she was someone I deeply loved, and she was the one who encouraged me to go into nursing, even though I didn't think it was something I could do. I have a nephew now that decided to become a nurse because I was a nurse.
Wow.
So, it's, to me, it's kind of just the whole idea of, needing to care for our fellow man. Not just, I shouldn't say just our fellow man, care for animals, nature, everything. And so just, developing the attitude and kind of the idea of, everybody deserves to be cared for, and how it might look for one person is different, but it just, that caring, compassion, and our need to do that for the people around us.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. For myself, one of the tenets that I grew up with, and it was a tenet in the house, and I hope to carry it on, and that Easton will carry it on, and his children, is that God is everywhere and is in everything.
Yeah. Yep.
Including us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that that's the one teaching that will carry on throughout and will be disseminated. And that I also grew up with the tenet that there are many pathways to the Creator. No one has the only path, And for some people that, they're kind of on the struggle bus with that. But that was two of the tenets in our very military Catholic house. God is in all things, and there are many paths to the Creator.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And have some fun, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
And I just think about how that's shaped you, right? And for you too, Kat, with your nursing, and how that it shapes who we are, those things that we pass on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing to be thinking about.
So for the both of you, do your ancestors ever come to you in your dreams?
Yes.
Oh, can you share?
Well, because I before bed last night, I prayed about what insight they might have for me to share tonight. So, and what I got was like the community that we're talking about, the community, togetherness, laughter, love, singing, dancing, right? That togetherness. And that, I've probably talked about this before on other shows, but that, we're hardwired for a sense of belongingness and community as human beings. That's part of what evolutionary-wise has kept us going. And so, those moments of joy or togetherness, right, where even though after a hard day, if we can find the gratitude in what's happening and the togetherness, how that keeps us strong, it keeps us going.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. I think, Nicole, I'd be interested to know what you think in relationship to this is, I think the pandemic in many ways has reminded us of the importance of relationship in our lives, because we've had to be away from, those people that are important to us for the most part, over the holidays. Many families could not get together, and that's generally our time to get together. And As you said, I think this whole idea of community, of needing to care for one another, of being aware of what's going on with my neighbor and trying to reach out to them and help them out. That's the way our ancestors lived. I mean, they were, they were probably very much aware of what was going on with their neighbors. And I have to say, I live in a condo building. I don't know any of my neighbors, and that's sad. I mean, I don't even see them hardly in the hallways. But we've kind of become these little family units that just live, kind of isolated from our bigger family. And again, that's been one of my big lessons through all this, is just how much relationships, people, community need to be part of who I am as we move out of this pandemic.
I often think to myself, with regard to my European relatives that came here from the Netherlands and Scotland and England, I think to myself, number one, what was the impetus for them to come across the big pond? And number two, as Rob is saying, settlers were happy to be alive.
Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, all that mud would have done me
right?
in. Yeah. So
just grateful to be alive. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think to myself, when I look at my ancestors on Ancestry.com, and recently I was taking a deeper dive and to find out that I'm related to George Washington, and several of my grandfathers fought in the American Revolution and the War of 1812 and all that good sort of a thing. And I think to myself, it wasn't really very pleasant back then.
No. Yep.
And yet, they did find joy. And sometimes I look at them and I think to myself, well, no wonder I have some pretty strong metal. It took a lot for our relatives, wherever they happened to be, well, just even before, indoor plumbing, let's keep it real. My dad, the Sarge, when he was little, they did not have indoor plumbing. And I think to myself, and even though what we find convenient today did not exist back then, the will to exist and the wisdom to exist and to flourish is ancestral, I believe.
Yeah, all the preceding ancestors to get us to this point, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you go back to Rob's point, which I think is very, very real, you think about the settlers who came and were, miles apart from each other. If the woman's husband died, she was alone. She had to make her family work. I mean, she had to, work to keep her children alive. And, as you said, that inner fortitude, that inner strength, that, just the determination that many of them had to keep going despite what was going on around them, the elements, the animals, whatever.
Yes, and I mean, I think of another question is like, what gave you the will to keep going?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially, right now we have such significant mental health concerns, and suicide is a high, I think number 7 cause of death with adults, and number 2 or 3 with adolescents. It's like, what do you have? What wisdom can you share with people that are struggling with, the symptoms of depression? Keep going. How did you do that?
How did you do that?
Absolutely.
Yes. I was looking at part of the ancestry, and it described one of my grandfathers who was killed by Native Americans. And I thought, well, he's probably killed by one of my other relatives, back in the day. down in, I believe it was South Carolina. And so what was that like for my grandmother, who then was left with the children and the little farm or whatever they had back then? And I know that they pulled on, I believe, a lot of our ancestors pulled on ancestral songs to keep them strong. Whether it was my ancestors out in the cotton fields or my ancestors in the church pew, they were singing to keep themselves strong. They were connecting to spirit to keep themselves strong. How do you suppose that your relatives were connecting to spirit to stay strong, Nicole?
Oh, well, I know, I'm just thinking of my grandmother who, my dad's mom, who she suffered a lot in her life, and she played the piano. And, you know, how that, I think, probably really gave her the will to keep going. So, yeah, I have to think the music, because I know how it feels, right, when you sing or the music's flowing through you, through dance or whatever, drumming, like that is, like you said, the spirit. The spirit is moving through us.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us feel alive and connected.
Exactly. Kat, how do you suppose that your ancestors connected to spirit or with spirit to stay strong and hopeful?
That's a really good question. Well, you know, my guess is that that church and religion was an important part of their life, and so there was probably that community that they felt drawn to. But as you said, you know, I think a big part of church is the music of the church. I think that's a very valid point about, you know, one of the things that we talk about in shamanism is how songs are an important part of healing. That the voice is actually can be a very big healing tool for people. And so, you know, I guess my thought is probably the way they stayed, that, you know, again, I think it was them staying connected with their family, but the bigger community as well. So.
I love that. Rob is sharing, my first connection to my ancestors came from playing my uncle's old 4-string banjo. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's really cool.
And going back, Nicole, to what you just mentioned, Rob made a comment. He said, the survival instinct is very strong. It's actually a statement of the times that it is overwhelmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our survival instinct, the survival instinct for many right now is just plain overwhelmed by the times we're living in. Yeah. I know that my ancestors sang, and I know they danced, and we're coming up on Imbolc. And I always, well, now that I know that I'm 30% Scottish, right, I just take myself back to Outlander, right, and I just see myself floating between the stones. But my whole point in that is that, you know, whatever portion of ancestry that my people belong to, I believe that connecting to Creator came in the songs, in the dance, and in the coming together in ritual. Do you think that your family did that as well, Nicole?
I feel like they had to. And I remember stories my other grandmother would share about during the Great Depression, how they as a community would come together, and they all, you know, as a community would grow crops together and grow their own food and things. So, yeah, it has to be, that community, that togetherness.
What about you, Cad? Did you feel that way when you were in any of the Stonehenges in Ireland?
Yeah, it's. I think I'm fascinated. I'm really fascinated by what life would have been like for my ancestors pre-Christianity. Because Christianity just kind of took over, and what was it like for them to just be so connected to earth and the spirit of the stone and the spirit of the trees, and to just feel that as part of who they were, versus what it was like when again prior to Christianity coming in and being kind of overthrowing all of those belief systems. So
yeah, watching even the migration of birds. I'm always fascinated, even here in the Enchanted Forest, with the migration of birds. And Todd and I can almost pinpoint exactly when the hummingbirds will be back, when they will be going away. I mean, we've really, living out here in nature, we've become very acclimated and attuned to nature. And it's a beautiful way of being. And I believe right now that for many, particularly here in the West, are looking for that connection to indigenous, pre-Christian.
Yep.
They're looking for the connection to the dirt and the trees and the stars and the sky and creatures great and small. And not only are they looking for it, some are dying for it, some are craving it, and some are completely altering their lives in order to have it.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about that as a therapist, Nicole? What is it within us in the modern day that really so many have come to a place where we are thirsty for indigenous?
Yes. Damn thirsty, right?
Damn thirsty.
Puppies. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think it takes me to that place of like that eighth fire prophecy, right? Of like, we've grown so disconnected that it's not just connecting with each other, that like what Cad's saying too, that connection with the earth, where like when I'm feeling out of sorts, I have a little spot on the river by my house that I will stop at and just sit on the banks of the river, and it's like instant connection.
Wow.
Of how even just the sound of the water, right? That, and this world is so overstimulating.
Yeah.
And nature soothes us and like gets us back centered. So it's magical.
I agree with you. Cad, I'm curious. You are a pediatric nurse practitioner, and you are a shamanic practitioner, and a death doula. What is it? What is the gift of connecting with the indigenous? What is the gift that our body, our emotions, our mind, what is the gift of connecting?
Well, so I think personally, it's our blood and our bones and everything that calls us back to those places of the needing to be connected to the earth. There's part of me that wonders, and Nicole may have an opinion about this, is whether some of the mental illness some of that type of what we're seeing in so many kids nowadays. Right now, my desk at the hospital, the cubicle that is one cubicle over sits a social worker, and she's on the phone all day long, preparing or trying to find placement for children who have mental health issues. And so to me, I think it's our body calling us to try and get back to what's natural. Being outside in nature. There's many books written about children who are deprived of that, and some of the physical illnesses that they have in relationship to not being exposed to enough nature, but being exposed to too much stimulation, as Nicole said. Just being on the laptop or the iPad or whatever, and I, for me personally, I know my body tells me when I need to be out in nature more. It kind of just draws me out there, and especially this time of year, I just go out and take a big sigh.
Yeah.
I think it's our body's just natural way, and the thing I think though is that we have to really be quiet enough to hear it, because so much noise around us. I think it's our body's gift to us, as you pointed out, Dana. But there's sometimes we don't recognize the gift that's being offered to us, and we just kind of go on with things the way they are. And quite frankly, I feel that probably a lot of that is what leads to the dis-ease that we are seeing.
I remember when my kids were little, and I always, had this a little saying. I don't know where I got the saying, but I always had this little saying that a teaspoon of dirt each day wouldn't hurt them.
Yeah.
Right, good minerals and good dirt. And I would let them get so dirty outside playing. And I would always say to myself, they're going to sleep really well tonight because they had the dirt on their skin. And it was so nourishing. And so I never worried about them getting dirty, because I knew that the dirt was literally nourishing their skin. And being connected to the earth in that way was nourishing to them mentally and emotionally. And yes, Lady Hawk, helping with anxiety, getting out there and doing those things. And then, having a bath in the evening and watching how dirty the bathtub ring would be. Who would have the dirty, the bigger bathtub ring of dirt contest. But they always slept soundly, and I always attributed it to that teaspoon of dirt every day, whether they swallowed it or whether they just had it rubbed all over their skin. It was good for them.
Yeah.
And so I've already prepared Elise that she can expect when Easton is here with Granny. He probably will have dirt behind his ears and in the creases of his elbows and knees and toes, right, when he goes home. Because it is so needed, I believe, this connection. And I believe right now, the wisdom of the elders, and our elders in general, are so present. And they're present with us during this pandemic. And I feel as though we're not only living for ourselves at this moment in time, but we are also living for our ancestors who are very present in our blood and our bones, but I also believe they do walk with us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And because this is a very pivotal moment in time, Nicole, as a therapist, what do you recommend to people? I think the ancestors are always whispering to us, go outside, take a deep breath, eat better, what have you, sing a song. But what else can people do at this point in time to nurture their soul?
Yeah, I think listening to voice within that's whispering to do something, whether, like you said, to go outside. Or I was talking with someone today who said, this may sound stupid, but I always wanted to do kind of race cars. And I thought, yes, do more of that, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But how we kind of long to do something of like, that might sound very childlike and playful, which I would link back to our inner child, just needing more play and fun and rest and relaxation or whatever. But doing something that, because we are so work oriented and burned out, that we need to be so intentional about play and joy and rest. So whatever that might look like, away from maybe electronics, right? Which just can really serve to stimulate us even more. And then there's so much division right now, right? So
right,
to get into a place of harmony, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I just see in my mind's eye an entire long lineage of inner children going back hundreds of years in our ancestry that would have wonderful healing. The ripple effect of that. Yeah. Cad, from a shamanic perspective, for those that are, tuning in tonight because they want to tap into the wisdom of their elders, and maybe the wisdom of their elders was not written down, maybe it was verbal, and maybe there hasn't been anybody in 100 years that remembers the songs or remembers the stories or the traditions. How does somebody go about connecting to their ancestors in spirit to begin to receive or to be led to ancestral wisdom?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the first things that I think about is trying to utilize the ancestors that are here now. But as you said, many of them may not have the information, may not know the information. So, for me, it goes back to, again, finding time to just be quiet with myself. Because one of the things I have felt and discovered is that when I can quiet myself enough, that there will be those gentle whispers in my ear. Some of the voices I recognize as, people, ancestors that I've had this lifetime with. Other ones I do not, but have the sense that they are my ancestor. And I think that it's very appropriate to ask them is there a song? Is there something? Can you show me where I might find, information, or can you sing the tune to me, or things like that? I think part of being quiet is also being open to the potential synchronicities of coming in contact with someone else who might be able to share information with you as an individual that may be pertinent to what you're trying to find. So, maybe it's not particularly your ancestor, but maybe Spirit brings someone in contact with you that has information that would be helpful to you, a song or a story, or that would lead you down a road of being able to find more information. So, I think it can be our own ancestors, but there's also those folks that we come in contact that can bring us information as well. And then, our dreams. I think dreams are a very powerful way of receiving information from our ancestors. And oftentimes it's simply before you go to sleep at night, you set the intention and you ask your ancestors to come to you, and you can ask for specific information. And many times they will provide that information. Maybe not always in the way that you expected it, but I find that oftentimes the information does come.
I agree. For myself, every morning I light a candle on my ancestral altar, and I simply ask, good, kind, loving, illuminated ancestors, please come and lead me to your wisdom, or lead your wisdom to me. Yeah. And I wait for the synchronicities. I'm awake and aware to the synchronicities, and I'm grateful for them. And I follow them. I trust them. And I have been astonished at what has come along the path my whole life, just by asking, putting up a prayer or a request, and then being awake and aware of the possibilities and the miracles disguised as synchronicities.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, and they're not always people. Animals can come to us. A song. So it's, as you said, it's kind of just having that open heart, because, and it's always interesting to me, because when it happens, it's like, it almost in some ways takes your breath away.
It doesn't get old.
Right.
It doesn't get old.
So you're almost surprised, but oftentimes I find that when I act surprised, I'll hear the ancestors say, "Well, didn't you ask for that?" You asked for the information. Now you're surprised that you got it. So.
Last Friday I had phase 4 of my ancestral back piece, the tattoo, tattooed on. And for me, connecting with the wisdom of my ancestors and the tradition has been going into the art and the art of tattooing.
Yeah.
And so now I have the entire upper back piece of my back piece is complete. And just finding the Celtic knotwork or the African symbolism, the native symbolism, having those pieces of family heritage and culture tattooed on my back. I was just on the phone prior to the show with a friend, and she said, "What is it like for you to have the tattoo put on?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I feel as though I am literally carrying my ancestors, their wisdom, their stories, themselves in my flesh."
Yeah.
Tattooing is part of ancestral connection. Yep. Whether it's ancestral totems being tattooed on, or what design work, symbology, what have you. So there are many ways that we can connect with our ancestors. And for me, it's a great, good blessing to be able to do that. Nicole, do you ever find in your practice sometimes that maybe people are a little bit hesitant to connect with the pre-Christian aspect of who they are, for fear of shame or blame? Or how do you help somebody? Maybe I should ask it this way. What would you suggest as a therapist for somebody who feels fearful of stepping back in time to connect with their ancestors who lived before the Abrahamic religions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I mean, I am big on just listening to that inner voice, that inner wisdom, that inner intuition, and that, getting in touch with that sense of what does it feel pleasurable to think about doing it? Does it feel scary? What's the reason it feels scary? Or maybe you're just not even interested then, right? But listening to that inner voice, and I think most people are feeling very called to go deeper, to know more, to have a lot of curiosity outside of the Christian faith. And wanting to connect with kind of more of these indigenous ways. So, I would most certainly be giving permission to do that if someone was feeling called to do so.
Thank you.
Dana, do you think that might be part of the reason why there's kind of this interest in past life regression?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I believe that, Cad, because there are a lot of people wanting to stretch back into time to find out who they were and what their experience was. And I think that, we can include our ancestors in that. I think that we have been our ancestors, or we are our ancestors in some cases.
Right.
I agree with that, Cad.
Yeah.
And, in my practice, yesterday it was wall-to-wall clients, and one particular client repeated something that I've heard over and again, and it's the idea that their practice has been that either on Saturday or Sunday they went to church.
Yeah.
And now that practice is no longer a practice and there's an empty space. But there's a feeling that they're not equipped, allowed, or privileged enough to be able to connect with spirit outside of that path. Cad, what do you say to people who are trying to reconcile bringing that practice home?
Yeah, that kind of, in some ways, was my path. Because once I left the structure of a church, there was part of me that still that felt like I needed to have. How was I going to develop my spiritual nature if I didn't have that structure? And one of the things that I discovered, just for me personally, was that a lot of my spirituality and my spiritual practice took me outside. And took me outside to experience God, goddess, whatever, in nature. And so it was much more of an experiential type thing for me versus needing to have the four walls of a church.
Right.
So a lot of it was, developing my heart muscle in many ways to be able to think outside of, needing a minister, needing the four walls of a church. But I do understand the piece of that that's important is the community.
The community, yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that many people in churches right now are having a difficult time with is not being able to get together with community.
Yeah.
And so, for me, some of it was finding like-minded people that to build that community. And so sometimes you have to, So one of the things that I think was important for me was I had to find it myself. It wasn't someone just feeding me something. It was something that I needed to do to nurture that, to continue to be part of, and so I get what they're challenged with because churches right now are having a very difficult time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard for some people to remember our ancestors did not have a church on every street corner or strip mall. And sometimes you had to travel by wagon a long time. I remember Barbara Dolknife telling me when she was little, she would travel with her mom and dad in a horse-drawn carriage to get wherever they needed to go. And one day she and I were at St. John's Church, which is the original church that was there at Wounded Knee at the time of the massacre. And we were there for Davian's confirmation ceremony. And afterward, I was I ended up in the church by myself. It was me and a photographer from National Geographic. Walter, and he and I just had this wonderful conversation about the spirits in the church and the spirit of the church. And Barbara came in and she said, this was the first church on the prairie.
Wow.
I said, really?
Wow.
And she said, yes, this was the first church on the prairie for us. And it just took me a minute to realize, not every strip mall, street corner had a church back in the day. And so families gathered at home. Or they had a picnic and they read out of the good book, And so I've reminded some of my clients from far-flung places that it wasn't always that we had a church readily available. And back in the day, everybody had their own little bundle, right, that they would bring out. And for many people, that Bible has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. But for some people, that's been a real reconciliation, is how do I connect with Creator if I don't have the bricks and mortar? And that can create depression, right, Nicole?
Yes, I mean, that feeling disconnected and, can really definitely contribute to symptoms of depression.
Yeah.
Well, the other piece of that is, I think, you're challenged to really find your spirituality.
Yes.
Because of the fact that, you don't necessarily have someone up there at the pulpit reading from the Bible, telling you the stories and things like that. You're forced to find that spirit within, that part of you that the divine within that exists in all of us. Mm-hmm. And I think that for some people, they're starting to wake up to that piece of them that has existed forever, but they just maybe weren't aware of how prominent it was in their life.
Exactly. And there again, we come back to the songs and the piano and the banjos and the, connecting to one another and connecting to joy and connecting to source and connecting. And there are so many ways of doing it that our ancestors knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's available.
If we think about the pagan calendar, the pagan calendar actually has gatherings about every 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. In which they celebrate their spiritual path. They're getting together, they're celebrating, they're eating together, they're having food, and sharing, and then there's some type of celebration in relationship to what's happening within the earth, and kind of the whole picnics and those types of things. Community is a very important thing. I think and I think that's one of the things that has been so challenging during all this.
Mm-hmm. Well, isolation is like the main driver of symptoms of depression.
Yeah.
So, we are not meant to live in isolation, but through, I think, some of, what's happening is people are getting more connected, values are shifting and people are realizing the importance of togetherness and, but also getting connected back to that soul-centered place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Well, with that, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight, wherever you happen to be around Grandmother Earth. And for those in the chat room, thank you for joining us in discussion. And this is an astonishing time here at the apex of Aquarius. The return of the divine feminine, rejoining the divine masculine. And we see it around us. We may be feeling it within us. And this is the time that we really need our ancestors. Not only do we need one another, but to reach out to the ancestors. And if you have an ancestor who is still alive, and they can regale you with the stories, or write your own story. Yes, Lady Hawk. Think about the ancestors yet to come, and maybe take a moment to write your story for prosperity. And last thought from you tonight, Nicole.
Oh, I love the marriage of the patriarch and the matriarch, and how so much of what we're talking about is, kind of stirring the soul through our ancestors. So, the importance of that.
Thank you for that. And Cad, last word from you this evening.
I think I'm just my emphasis on community and the importance of community, and however that community looks to you.
I like that. Make it your own. Make it unique.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. With that, everybody, get out there and shine your light and connect with your ancestors. They've got much to teach and much to share. Blessings be, everybody. Good night, Cad. Good night, Nicole.
Good night, Dana. Good night, Cad. Good night, everyone.
Good night.